Uh, I've done it around, the Ludlow Massacre, recorded around the Colorado mines when I find them. I found a guy who was at the Ludlow Massacre in Denver, and the author of one of the main histories. Like McGovern did a history of the Ludlow Massacre, but this man lived in the area, a guy named Baron Bashors, and his father was a physician for the mine workers in 1904 to 1913 in the coal camps. Let me, it's a hobby. I'm closer to it and I'm going to come over, so I may, here's the pickup point, okay? This is November 19, 1973, and we're in the home of Dr. David Minter in Tucson, Arizona. Present and talking with me are Dr. Minter and his wife Sue. I suppose, Dave, what we ought to do is, with Sue putting in as she sees fit freely at any point, except you may have to speak up with a good bit of sharpness and clarity. I'll watch just to be sure the needle's moving. It's picking me up kind of heavy, and if it picks him up light, it'll be all right. Is get the general background in Mississippi, if we can, the general setting. What was going on, what year it was, what had happened, because you spent a good many years in Mississippi, and that's what we want to focus on, what you did in Mississippi, what your experiences were.
Should I actually went
to
Mississippi.
Be autobiographical in any way you like.
Well, I actually went to Mississippi because of the Delta Cooperative Farm, which started 2 years before I went.
All right, what was the Delta Cooperative Farm, and where was it?
It was 90 miles south of Memphis, near the Mississippi River in Bolivar County, and they later were able to get a post office, fourth class, called Rochdale, because it was a cooperative farm named after the cooperative in England. And it was started by a very varied group made up of some Eastern liberals and university professors from Memphis and union people. One member of Printers Union, Blaine Treadway from Memphis, who was interested in it, and the Southern Tenant Farmers Union. The original group of people went over into Arkansas and were jailed there because of Union sympathies, and they went back aroused and raised money and went over and moved some 25 or 30 families, both black and white, into Mississippi after
to Bolivar County, which was the beginnings of the Delta
Farm. They raised money to buy a farm, and we're going to start a cooperative farm project.
And these people been evicted?
People had been evicted from their sharecropper houses and were camping in tents along the highway.
They'd been evicted in Arkansas and had been brought down to this prearranged
place in Mississippi.
Right. To establish the farm.
And that was in sometime early spring, I think, of 1936. And shortly after...
Then prior to that, the Southern Tenant Farmers Union had come into being. Is that right? This was a result of some of its activities, you think?
Yes. I don't know how many years it had been in activity. And there was a small union local, probably one of the few union locals of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union in Mississippi was at the farm. And it was a biracial union.
Had it previously existed, or did it exist because of the imported families?
It existed because of the families that were there. And there were a lot of people that really didn't some of the people who were there really didn't understand or support the union, but some of the white families, I think, had a little bit of background and training and maybe socialist leaning mixed in with some of their usual Southern ideas. far as the medical scene in Mississippi in 1936, it was still depression. Cotton was 5 cents a pound. Doctors weren't making any money even in the cities. Deliveries were usually $25.
Were they home deliveries?
Home deliveries, $25. There was no hospital insurance. By the first medical care at the farm was given through a nurse, Mrs. Lindsay Cox. Lindsay Hale, when she came down, later married Gene Cox, who was one of the farm, one of the people interested in the farm who had come over from TCU in Texas. And Lindsay was supported by a grant from the National Board of Presbyterian Missions. And they had a volunteer doctor that came down from Memphis named Gardner Widener. He used to come down once a week to hold clinic and to give shots and whatever. And they hired a physician from a nearby town, Dr. Day, to provide medical care for the patients. And the manager of the farm, the local manager, had hopes of starting a medical cooperative. And they went looking for a doctor, and I was finishing a 2-year rotating internship in Philadelphia in 1938, and through some connections with people who knew me and who knew about the farm, interested me in visiting at first in the spring of 1938, and after being down there, I decided that I would go down and stay for a year. And the board, I guess the farm board guaranteed that I would come out with a net income of $1,000 a year if from private practice. If I didn't make that much, they would make up the difference. But since the first year my net income was about $970, I made it entirely from just fees collected from patients.
Now, when you say they had guaranteed you $1,000 a year, was there any other income, or was this to be your income? What were they meaning by that?
Well, that was all the income. Of course, I was unmarried in the clinic building, which was to be built before I arrived the next summer, 1st of August, was to have some rooms upstairs, and I had a room in the clinic in which I lived and took my meals in what was called the staff house. And I think we paid board of $5 a week or something like that for meals, and the room was free, thrown in.
You were the first full-time doctor of the Delta Cooperative Farm.
Yes.
And if I understand what you've described, prior to your arrival, the woman who became Mrs. Cox was the only full-time person rendering services, and she
Yes.
was a nurse.
Yes.
Was she functioning the way we'd describe a nurse practitioner today,
Yeah,
somewhat?
I'm sure she was.
Yes, she treated all ordinary illnesses, routine types of things, but she would hold any questionable cases for the doctor who came down from Memphis at I think weekly intervals, and if they had any seriously ill patients, she would take them over to the doctor in the nearby town.
How was transportation handled?
My son wanted the farm cars or vehicles.
When you mention a staff, you ate with us in the staff house, I think you said.
Yeah.
Who was the staff? Who managed the farm? How much staff was there?
Well, it varied. Just before I came in 1938, Sam Franklin and his family moved to Providence, which was in Holmes County, Mississippi. They bought another farm down there, as this one was not turning out to be as good land as they had anticipated.
How many acres did they have, by the way, at the Delta?
Approximately 2,000 acres of land. and with a fair amount of timber on it. And it was typical Delta land. We were about 2.5 miles from the levee, and it was black gumbo. And the land had, everybody said that they had made a mistake in buying it because the people that had had it before had gone broke. The two previous owners had gone broke, so.
The gardens in summer, you know, crack open like this and that black gumbo mud when it was wet, you couldn't get.
What were they trying to raise on it?
They had a cotton allotment,
Mhm.
and they were trying to, they had a pasture in which they had a dairy which was owned cooperatively, had a co-op store, and they issued part of the pay of the people that worked there was issued in scrip, which was redeemable at the store. They had a cooperative garden, and
Quaker family, the Youngs, Wilmer and Mildred Younghurst, Pendle Hill now, were gardens, I
I think the Quaker family ran the garden, and Blaine Treadway, who was a member of the Printers Union,
Yes.
had come down from Memphis because of his interest, and he married Dorothy Benz, who was a Quaker who had come down to join her sister and brother-in-law and to work at the clinic because of her background in chemistry and working in a New York hospital. But before the clinic opened, officially with my being there in 1938, she had married Blaine, and her baby was born just a few days after I arrived, and so it was delivered in a hospital by another doctor. So we
Wasn't
didn't.
there a credit union at that time too, or did that start prior?
There was a small credit union, but the
The
co-op.
Treadways did stay then, or they?
Treadways later moved to the other farm and lived for a while in Lexington. At the other farm, a cooperative dairy was started, and it had to fight battles because it was the first dairy in Holmes County selling pasteurized milk, and it was fought by the local authorities in every way as pasteurizing milk being un-American, et cetera, et cetera. Treadways, I don't know where we get lost in the sequence here. You asked a while ago about the staff.
Yeah.
The farm was actually run by a farm council made up of both black and white members.
By the way, how many, you say they brought down to begin with 35 families. When you were there, what was the range? What was the size of the number of
There were
families
actually-
or workers or any other way?
I
you
think
wanted to
actually
put
there
it?
were probably no more than 22 or 3 families when I first arrived. And just adjacent to us to the north was a Farm Security Administration project which had about 35 families. And you're familiar with the
Yeah,
type
this was
of-
the Farm Security Administration, or was it then called that, or was it resettlement at the time? Or I forget
maybe
how
it's
those.
called resettlement. I
And
forgot,
then later
but
that became Farm
FSA.
Security. Was that the way that went?
thought
This
that
was
Maybe.
an all-white
Okay.
project
Yeah.
in which they were given a house.
Where did
and
they
so
get
many
their
acres
medical
and so on.
care?
Well, after I arrived, I saw a good many of them.
Mhm.
And gradually over a period of time, I built up a practice from the
But this
surrounding
was all
community.
fee for service?
Fee for service.
What made them think they needed a medical clinic for 20? I mean, what was in the dream? Was it
Well, I-
practical?
Well, I think the dream that they had was that they thought that the cost of taking patients to a doctor in town 13 miles away, his fees were too high. Although I think for a while he did work on a retainer of $100 a month just for treating the farm families.
Mhm.
And they instituted the treatment. They did serologies, and anybody that had a positive serology for syphilis was given treatment. Later on, this function was taken over by the health department. But the original founders of the farm, I think, were impressed by the fact that a lot of people in the surrounding community on plantations were poor. There were other doctors around, and if you were a sharecropper, whether white or black on a plantation, you went to the plantation doctor, and your bill was guaranteed and deducted as part of your expense of making the crop. They saw that as just another evil of the sharecropper system.
Do you mind staying with that a minute, because that's something I'm not familiar with, but has an interesting element to it. In other words,
The company store.
yeah, it was.
It really was.
If I understand it right now, the people who founded the Delta were looking at the established plantation pattern,
Yeah,
and these sharecroppers not only had to go to the plantation store, is that right? And were they paid in scrip, or they had credit line, I guess,
Had credit.
up to the whatever the plantation owner wanted to give them. Now, he would then designate a doctor to whom they were to go, a sole designated doctor, is that right,
Right.
of his selection?
well, usually
This
there
was the
usually
standard
there was
procedure?
only one nearby.
All right.
They didn't have much choice.
Yeah.
Either the plantation
Sure.
owner or the tenant.
Yeah,
But he would only guarantee to pay the bill if they went to the doctor with whom he
yeah.
made the arrangement.
Now, do you know what those arrangements would happen to be in dollar terms and fee terms? I'm trying to just get a picture of how things were on the plantations.
I'm not really sure. Some doctors worked in a large plantation south of us, about 10 miles away. It was a little community called Deason, and it was part of the Delta Land and Pine Company, which was a British-owned corporation, which had been there for many, many years. And the doctor there was, I believe, on salary. And
Salary to that corporation?
salary to that corporation, plus whatever private practice he had in
Yes.
addition to it. Other small plantation owners might choose to send their patients to one of several different doctors, with an agreement that most of the time that their bills were paid at the end of the month, but usually at the end of the year after they'd sold the crop.
A lot of them came out either in the bag or with several $100
Yeah.
at the end of the whole
So this
year.
was again part of the whole plantation owner system. In other words, the doctor would have been seen as another means of exploitation of why they were in debt at the end of the year.
The only way that you could get doctors into those poor Mississippi towns and to see people was to have somebody guaranteed to pay the bill. And so, in effect, the fact that the plantation owners guaranteed the doctor that they were going to pay his bill at the end of the year did allow for a number of doctors to be there who otherwise would not have been there.
Right.
Now, the health department in Mississippi had always been really ahead of its time, the state health department under Dr. Underwood, and they had programs of immunizations against typhoid fever and programs of building privies, and they started a syphilis treatment program, and as part of the county, working with the county health department, once a week we had a syphilis treatment clinic going at the
How many weeks did they have to come for those shots?
well, the
It
treatment
just
then
went
was
on and on.
alternately 10 weeks of arm injections of Mafarsen and 10 weeks of hip injections, and that went on for 2 years.
Right.
I remember
And
those people pouring in on
we
clinic
started
day.
clinic on around 5:30, 6 o'clock on Friday morning, and finished up around 1 and treated around 250 patients every Friday morning.
This was a serious problem in the area.
Yes, it was, and we gave them, this is pre-penicillin era days, and as an aside, we unfortunately started treatment on all the so-called latent cases. We treated them on the basis of serology, whether they had symptoms or not, without doing spinal taps as spinal fluid examinations as would normally be recommended. But we did manage, after we got started into the program, to persuade a number of people to come in to have spinal fluid examinations done. And it was with a little bit of fear that we tried the program. We had about 20 come the first week, and we wondered how it would fare, because we told them all that after their spinal tap was done to go home and lie down, stay in bed for the rest of the day and not to work. And we wondered whether any of them would ever come back for their treatments. And the next week, one tall, very black man came in and called out from the door as he came in. He says, "Doc, I want another one of those back treatments because my back has felt so good ever since." And there were about 30 patients sitting in the waiting room. Well, he made the thing, and everybody wanted to come and get a spinal tap.
Maybe this is the time for the story about the old lady with TB, or the neural.
Well, that was down in Providence.
Well, but it's the same disease.
Yeah, if you want to talk about syphilis.
Yeah, go ahead.
Bolivar County and Holmes County are very different. Bolivar is delta, it's flat country near the Mississippi River. Holmes County is part delta and part hill country. And both the white and the black people that live in the hills and live in the delta are sort of different sort of folks. The hill people say the delta people are loose living and drinking folks, both white and black, and the hill folks tend to stay married and go to church and don't raise quite as much hell, although a lot of bootleg whiskey was made up there. But
Well, they have their own little hill farms, they're individual owners.
yeah, they own more or less sharecropping in the hills. And I was called to see one day a black patient that I'd seen before who was really tearing up our house. When I got there were neighbors gathered some 30 or 40 feet around the house, maybe quite a crowd, and you could hear her shouting and yelling and carrying on, and they had to restrain her. And I went in and, among other things, after giving her some medicine to quiet her down, they had to hold her down while we gave her a shot. I took a blood test, and it was positive. And so I had to send the blood off to the state lab, and when I got the report back, I went back 2 or 3 days later, and she had several other signs that indicated that she had what used to be called general paresis or neurosyphilis. And I did a spinal fluid, which turned out to be positive. And by that time, after the war in 1947 or 8, penicillin had come in, and I had it in disposable syringe form. So I gave her the first dose of 600,000 units and left the husband 20 syringes. And he gave her an injection in the hip every day for 21 days. And within a very short period of time, she was, to be biblical, clothed and in her right mind. And everybody said it was a miracle.
Yeah.
And she was followed after that for some time as a patient, and it was one of the good responses to.
Let me go back, if I can, Dave, to the period of your arrival. What was the physical facility? They had promised you a clinic. When was it ready, and what was it like, and what was the setting in which you worked?
Well, the building was a 2-story frame structure, which was built out of saw logs, out of timber cut from logs cut on the farm. It was very inexpertly arranged, although I'd had a hand in saying how the rooms were to be arranged. It consisted of a small front porch and a waiting room and an office on the south end and 2 treatment rooms on the north end. And one of the treatment rooms had a large sink in which the laboratory work was done, blood counts and malaria smears and urines and things like that. It had what we call tin heaters in 3 of the rooms, and a stack of wood out behind, and a rain barrel to catch some rainwater, and a pump at the back, and a privy out back. And those were the facilities of the clinic.
You had running water, though.
We had water coming in. No, not running into the house. You'd go out.
You
and
had to go out to get water.
Get a bucket of water from the. The pump water was so bad that we did manage to collect enough rainwater so that most of the time we had pretty good clear water to use for doing things. We did have a sink with a drain going out into the field. We were right in the middle of a cotton field.
Who had built the building?
The men on the place. One of the former sharecroppers from Arkansas, Mr. O.C. Morgan, had come over with his family, and he was one of these men with multiple skills. As a carpenter, as a plumber, as a farmer. He set up from some old junk equipment a sawmill, operated it as a sawyer. They hauled cypress logs in and other types of timber, and they cut the timber and built the houses. All the houses on the farm were built from timber cut right from lumber made from saw logs cut green. Of course, there were a lot of cracks in the buildings as later on as the timber matured. But it was a very adequate building for our use at the time.
How many patients could be handled there? What would your daily load be like, and what was your practice like?
My memory is not very good on that part. It varied a great deal. Initially, we saw primarily just people on the farm, and as word got around, why the patients came in from the surrounding countryside, and they paid what they could.
What did that consist of?
They might pay 50 cents or a quarter or $1.
Who would ask them for
And,
the money? Would it be a girl out front, or how was the place?
They'd usually pay me.
Okay.
I had the nurse that worked with me most of the time.
Speaking of fame spreading, he took the wax out of the ear. Was it an old man? Came in and couldn't hear very well, so Dave took the wax out of his ear, and the word got all around the countryside that new doctor could cure deafness. So you had all kinds of people.
Yeah, that helped to get
that back situation and this deafness were two
Yeah.
of the great boosters you had early in the game.
Right.
Slim and young looking in those days.
We still had malaria, so when anybody had chills and fever, why you had to do a blood count and a malaria slide, and I treated a lot of malaria with quinine and Atibrin. And in the summer of '39, during my 4 years, first 3 years, I did not have a car. If I had to go on a house call.
What about house calls?
If I had to go on a house call, I'd go. If the patient came in, why I would get my bag and go with them, and then he'd bring me back.
In other words, they'd usually manage to get in their own car or a neighbor's car.
Some sort of car.
And you'd simply go with them?
Go with them.
About how many house calls would you make in those first 3 or 4 years, either a day or a week or any basis?
One of my decoupages is the young slim
Probably,
at the bottom of the patient.
We made relatively few house calls. I'd say that probably there would not be more than 2 or 3 a day at the most. And they'd be for very sick patients.
These were generally off the immediate cooperative farm.
I did make house calls on the people on the farm for minor things, but most of them came to the office. I saw 2 cases of proven typhoid fever, and my first and only case of diphtheria, which I had my 2 doctors saw, and the patient wouldn't follow the advice of either one of us until child was almost dead, and then we rushed him to Memphis to have a tracheotomy done and to get antiserum, because there was no hospital in Mississippi which would hospitalize a child with diphtheria at that time. One patient came over driving the tractor from the farm security project to the north of us. Came over, we found the children sitting on our lap, and she drove the tractor over to the clinic about 4 miles down across the field.
Lots on horseback, didn't you? Muleback.
Yeah, many people came that way or walked. My wife will remember, because shortly after we were married, we hadn't got our furniture set up the slats for the bed didn't fit, and the mattress was still on the floor. About 1 o'clock in the morning, January, somebody knocked on the window, and I had to get up, and because the road was so muddy, we had to walk through the woods about 1.5 miles towards the west, with the patient, who happened to be a Mexican, leading the way. His wife was in labor, so we had 2 bags to carry, and the water had backed up behind the levee, and it was in some places 2 and 3 feet deep. I wore hip boots, but he knew the path and guided me, and it was a moonlight night. And after the delivery, I was coming home about 4:30 in the morning. It was still dark, and I thought I could find my way because the sky was clear. And I got
You
about
cried.
halfway back, and I knew I was lost. I stepped off and went in over my thigh, and water came down into the boots. I then looked up at the stars and picked out the North Star and figured I was going the wrong direction, so I backed up, and I finally got out about daylight.
That was one of your worst house calls, I take it.
That was one of the worst houses.
How about deliveries? That's the first one you've mentioned.
They varied in numbers. They had fairly well-trained midwives. Most of the black patients used black midwives. Most of the white patients did manage to get a doctor, although some of them did use a black midwife for their deliveries.
This was prior to the formalized midwife training. These
Oh,
were
yes.
self.
These were usually older.
Didn't they have to be licensed, though?
They
by
had to
the
be
public
licensed
health?
by the health department,
Mhm.
and they were mostly older
Mhm.
black women
Mhm.
who had some instruction, and they tried to get their patients to attend the public health clinics then later on, although right.
Go ahead.
Uh,
I believe it's started.
we were
Something's wrong. It's. Go ahead. Turn.
we were kept in touch with our contact with the outside world first at Rochdale. We had a few friends in the surrounding neighborhood, although most people had originally considered this a communist project. And we...
Can we stop on that just a minute? Because what was, let's just get a picture of what was most shocking, say, to the Bolivar County establishment, and populace. How many different things were hitting them with a project like this that would make them believe it was, communist? How many different things as you saw it?
I think the fact that it was white-black families living together on the farm and electing representatives to a farm council.
When you say
which
they lived
advocated-
together, did the families have separate houses?
Families had separate houses,
Okay.
though they had a white row and a black row. One
Yeah.
up one side and one up on the other
Yeah.
side of the road.
Okay.
With the so-called community house or meeting house
Okay.
halfway in between,
Square dances on Saturday night.
attended only by whites.
The
They-
square dances
Yes.
were white
For the white.
White
activity.
only.
Mhm.
Blacks went to their own churches in the surrounding neighborhood. Whites had a Methodist preacher that came up once a month from a nearby town and had services in the staff house.
Was there a lot of opposition? No, I wasn't there, so I don't know.
I
Let,
think-
let me see. So the first, but part of what you're describing, this was still shocking to have this much proximity, even if there was a separation, as we're.
by
going
19,
over.
I think the initial shock was in 36 and 37 when they first went there.
Yeah.
By 1938, some of the initial shock in the surrounding community had worn off. They saw that there were people who were there were just ordinarily hard-working people, and they weren't any different from anybody else. And I think some of the people on the farm, I think they were suspected because they had so many visitors. The cooperative farm was written up as a social experiment, so they had people passing through it all the
Angry
time.
visitors.
Mhm.
And in the summertime in 1937, 38, and 39, there were American Friends Service Committee work camps in which there were some 25 or 30 college students from all over the country who came.
Let me jump to that because that's where Sue comes into the picture and get her to talk a little bit about. And I think we'll pick you up, Sue, but you may have to point whatever you have to say at this.
The thing that catches
Yeah,
thing.
pretend it's in the middle here.
Fancy.
What about your own arrival on the scene? When was it and in what capacity?
Well, 39, and I'd asked for my graduation from the University of Iowa present to be allowed to go to a work camp because we paid our own way. And
Mhm.
I was all set to go to Pencraft with the Quakers where they were building homes for miners.
That was in
Get
southwestern Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
I know
Do you know
Pencraft, and I know the Quaker
No,
guy
well,
that started
I was
Pencraft.
to go there
yeah.
and help, but then fate intervened and I was sent to Rochdale.
Well, that was sure fate, I tell you.
20 of us.
I'd hate to have been
and,
meeting you around Fairmont under different circumstances.
And the young doctor brought us our Atavrin pills, I guess, what, morning and night, or just in the morning?
Once a day.
During our devotionals, and so that's where we met.
What was the date? Does it stand out in your mind?
That I saw Dave?
Mm-hmm.
No,
Well,
not really.
June of 39 when the group arrived.
When the group arrived, okay. And you were
And
one,
since-
one of 20.
Mhm.
Since I'd been there 2 years, Mr. Cox, who
He was a confirmed bachelor.
had
by
since
then.
married Miss Lindsay Hale, the nurse,
Mm-hmm.
was always on the lookout, he and his wife and the others, for me to try to find a girl that I could marry.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd met a number of the Southern whites in Clarksdale and other places that I had, none of which had attracted me at all. So as the work campers came in by bus and by car, why, they looked them over. And they picked her out.
Oh, I see.
He was still hunting for a blue-eyed brunette southerner, but he didn't find one.
Sue mentioned about Atterbury. We had malaria, and Atterbury was one of the newer medicines that we used to treat it with. And I had read some
Preventative.
paper as a Winthrop Chemical Company that it had been used to prevent malaria or to suppress it,
Mhm.
suppress the clinical symptoms. So I wrote the Winthrop Chemical Company and asked them for a supply of Atterbury, and I was going to tried to get about 50 farm families, and ran malaria smears on everybody early in the summer, and we had a control group who took one Atterbury tablet a day, and we used the work camp as part of the control group, and others who did not take any Atterbury, and then we tried to see if we could keep what results. Only one of the work campers that I know of apparently had a case of malaria after he left and after he stopped taking his Atterbury, but there were no cases of malaria in the control group during the entire summer, whereas there were quite a few cases of malaria among the group that did not take Atterbury.
We were a pretty shocking influence, I think, these work campers to the community, because we wore shorts, you know, and remember we went to visit, what was
Well, person.
the old Southern poet, Will Person, and the camp, sit out around in places in our shorts and in our Yankee ways. I'm sure we were
First of
suspect.
all, you were from the north,
Yes,
the main group. Secondly, the Quakers were a strange
yes.
denomination for Mississippi. And third, you wore shorts. I think that's interesting. I mean, it may have been number one,
Yeah.
actually.
Of course, they said then that you were behind the Magnolia Curtain. If you were from North Mississippi, you were suspect as a
Yeah,
Yankee.
right. Well, this Bolivar County is where the present, I mean, it's pretty tough country to this day, Mound Bayou.
It
and,
still is, because the Mound Bayou Project, which, as you know, Jack Geiger
Right, from Boston
Boston
University.
started, and I guess Meharry took it over later.
Yeah.
As far as I know, they're still having problems.
Well, I think so. I visited there, as part of a three-man consultation team, and you meet in the Holiday Inn with the black mayor of Mound Bayou, but it's obvious where the white establishment, the fear of that kind of size of black population is so extreme that it almost underlies everything.
Our Holmes County was what, 75 or 80%?
When we were there, Holmes County, Bolivar County,
Mhm.
when we first went there, when I first it was about 85% black.
Yeah.
Later on, after the war, Holmes County was about 88% black,
Mhm.
but over the next 10 years, it dropped down to 70%. There was
Mhm.
a great exodus all over Mississippi.
Yeah.
But it was
The
interesting.
the mechanization of agriculture had not taken place when you were there?
Well, it was beginning to take place in Mississippi. We were trying to use mechanized things on the farm.
Did you have
These
tractors on the farm?
We had tractors. They used, of course, mechanized things in the
One of
logging
our-
equipment.
Mhm.
Board members was a cotton
Yeah.
picking guy.
Yeah. One of the
John
board
Russ
members
tried
was
to-
John Russ, one of the Russ brothers,
Oh, yeah.
invented the Russ
Tried
cotton
to
Yeah.
picker.
hold off his picker till he
Yeah.
could see away
And
these
he
people.
tried to
that did the
establish
job.
a Russ Foundation
Mhm.
so that the profits of his cotton picker
Mhm.
would go into trying
Yeah.
to find work to replace the people.
The people he'd try to work in.
We saw mechanization really take a jump after the war when we were in Holmes County, Mississippi. And literally each year there would be one or two families off of
Mhm.
large plantations where they might have 40 or 50 tenants who would be displaced as he bought a new item of equipment. And I had one patient, a black patient, and this was in Holmes County in about 1952, that came in with a very sad story. He had always made a big crop, 30 or 40, 50 bales of cotton, usually cleared $1,500, $2,000 every year. He had about 8 children, hard-working black man. And he came in and said, "I'm having to leave." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, the boss brought me out in the hole this year." And I said, "Do you have any statement to show?" He said, "No." He said, "Just expenses were so high that he said I didn't make anything." And he said, "Do any expenses any difference?" He said, "No, I never run up any big bills." And I said, "Well, why did he do it?" He said, "He needs a new tractor." He said, "That's what he does. He
They never had any
No
accounts
books,
of
no
their own.
counts?
no
They
counts,
depended
nothing.
on the boss
No,
man.
you're
Yeah. Let me go back, though, if I may, Dave, because I don't want to be artificial about separating. I want to get this first period. How long did you stay on the Delta farm?
I stayed till 1942 in August.
You met Sue in '39. When did you
We were
marry?
married in December 11th, 1940,
Mhm.
and we were there for until August. And changes were beginning to take place because the Pearl Harbor had happened in December '41. We had innocently were so far removed from national or world events that we were at that time thinking, because the shifting from Rochdale to Providence Farm in Holmes County, that we were going to build a clinic in Holmes County and move down there where there seemed to be a greater need.
Mhm.
And a black fraternity sorority had given the clinic an x-ray machine, which was in Providence Hospital in Chicago, an old x-ray machine.
Mhm.
And were willing, if I came up there and spent 6 weeks to learn how to use and run it, that they would ship it to Mississippi. And while I was in Chicago for 6 weeks in early June of 1942, the Army was looking for me, sending me my induction papers. And I
Got all
finally
these
got a
forwarded.
long-distance phone call from Mr. Cox saying that I better get back because my mail had been forwarded, and they were looking for me and wondering why I hadn't reported for duty.
So let's get your duty years now. You were in the military from when until?
August 1st of 42 to around March of 46.
When you came out, did you ever return to Delta Farm, or did you go to Holmes County?
Delta Farm, because of the war, people left jobs. Some people left to go into the military, some of the younger ones. Some left for jobs in shipbuilding down on the coast of Mississippi. Some left for other reasons, and the farm itself was sold. And so it actually,
By that time, it had been sold.
by the time I came out of the
Okay.
Army.
Then let me sort of try to get back on that other period and see if we're leaving any gaps. Was this a separate nonprofit corporate structure, or was it all part of the same thing, the Holmes County? Was each venture a separate thing that they could close out? And you mentioned the board, but I don't think we discussed it for the record.
Well, strange as it seems, I don't know. I stayed really away from the management
Yeah.
part of it. Unfortunately, as in so many projects, there developed personality clashes, feuds. While the board consisted of people like John Rust and a Dr. Amberson, who was a biologist from a school in Memphis and later back in the East someplace. The board split on policies of management.
Let's just deal with the board some more. Who else was on that national board?
Reinhold Niebuhr.
Reinhold Niebuhr,
Sherwood Eddy.
Sherwood Eddy.
Yeah.
Sam Franklin, as the resident manager, was on the board.
And this was the board of the Delta Cooperative Farm,
Delta
not of a
Cooperative
bigger
Farm. No,
structure. Okay.
no.
And how often
And
would
who
they
was the one
arrive
from
for
the
board
Farm
meetings?
Security Administration. Can't
One of the
remember.
big national figures in farm security?
Yes.
Mhm.
No. Right.
Okay.
But board meetings were not too frequent, maybe once a year.
So
And,
it was really personality clashes in local management and staff that...
differences in ideas
differences
about
in
how the
ideas.
farm was to be run.
Sure.
Management had ideas that the farm ought to be run this way. Some of the individual people began to have ideas that, well, you know, we'd rather have our own, let's split it up, let's have our own
Yeah.
30 acres and we'll
Mhm.
do it. They didn't like the...
Because you did have the Farm Security Administration example of that
Yes.
right to the north, huh?
Yes.
How are they
And-
making out? Any better? Or?
Depending upon the individuals, better,
Mhm.
some better, some worse.
Right.
There were some hard-working people who made
Mhm.
out pretty well, and some that didn't fare as well.
Did Farm Security ever, in the period you were there in that early period, develop any type of mode of payment other than allowing these people to pay you fee for service? Because in other places they developed some interest either in prepayment or some other mode of dealing
there
with
was
doctors.
there was
By the
some
sea shattered.
there was some effort to allow this type to develop some sort of prepayment thing,
Mhm.
but it never worked too satisfactorily.
You
I
went
think.
to meetings maybe, or they started it, do you remember, or what did they do with it?
I
It
don't
was
really
just
know.
talk, wasn't it? But didn't you go by to see Dr. Shattuck, who started
Oh,
the pre
Oh,
Yes.
Michael Shadid,
Yeah.
tell me about
Yeah,
that.
well,
Why did
in-
you do that?
Well, in 1938, after I'd been to the farm, or in the spring of
Mhm.
'39, I was going to Texas to visit my family, and I bypassed and went through Oklahoma to Elk City and saw Dr. Shadid
Mhm.
and told him, who incidentally offered me a job to come work in his hospital
Mhm.
because they needed another doctor. But I asked him about what he thought the prospects for starting a cooperative medical
Mhm.
project in Mississippi. and he said, you haven't got a snowball's chance in hell.
Time back in Oklahoma, he was having enough.
Haven't got any money.
He said you've got to
pay.
have a firm base of
Yeah.
individual farm owners who are cooperatively union-minded,
Mhm.
who will support it. And he says
Mhm.
you haven't got that in Mississippi, and you just forget about it.
Of course, he was thought very radical and communist
Oh, yeah.
with that prepaid scheme.
And
They
he
may
had
have
enough
fought
troubles
him,
later, you know.
Yeah.
didn't he?
Yeah.
We didn't
Yeah,
call
but you went to
for
see him in
free.
'39. Did you ever return to Elk City?
No, no, I've got a copy of his book, but
Yeah. Did you ever visit any other cooperative or group enterprises?
No, once, and I can't remember the date, I had a letter from Group Health of Puget Sound,
Mhm.
which asked if I would be interested in coming out there.
Mhm.
And I don't remember any of the details of this at all,
Mhm.
whether it was before the war or after the
Mhm.
war. I rather imagine it was after the war because
I
it
think
didn't
they
really
were
get
found.
started
They
until
they were very
45.
slow and before.
But I think Rochdale, which was the one in Bolivar County, the government was interested in it. The Farm Security Administration was cooperative with
But they
us.
didn't finance it in any way or
They didn't-
subsidize
They
it
didn't
in any way,
finance
did
it,
they?
no, we had no government grant.
You just
Money
had
was-
visitors. And,
Money was raised from church groups,
Mhm.
interested liberal contributors all over the country.
Mhm.
And
Was this true of the other project in Holmes County?
I think the money came into the same, into the board, the Delta Cooperative Farm, and as money was, it was the decision of that board to expand and to buy another farm in Holmes County. And they later, when Delta Cooperative Farm was sold, it was called Providence Cooperative Farm, although in effect it was never a cooperative farm.
Which one was never a cooperative?
Providence.
Providence. They had
in Holmes County.
in Holmes County. They had a dairy there, which is the primary thing. There were never more than about 10 or 12, the most 15 families. They were mostly white families,
Mhm.
2 or 3 black families that didn't stay too long.
Mhm.
And this was happening during the 4 years
Yeah.
that I was away, and so the character of the whole thing had changed by 1946 when we came.
All right, I want to pick up there. I just wanted to be sure we had covered this earlier period in your. Were there any other experiences you had in that first period that strike you now as significant? For instance, what did the Southern Tenant Farmers Union activity going on elsewhere have, if anything, to do with the Delta Cooperative Farm?
Well, about all I know, and Sue, didn't you go to a union meeting?
I went to one over in Arkansas. I think I remember one song, but
A little louder.
Was that, when was that, Sue? Was it
Gee,
when
I
you
don't-
were a
I
student
really
or
don't
later,
know.
after you
No, in
married?
the
No,
work
it-
camp in 39.
Was it in work,
Yeah.
during work camp days,
Mhm.
yeah. I have a very big-
You just were visiting it for
Bunch
an
of us went over
experience.
to a rally in
Mhm.
Arkansas Union.
What, was it a very large rally, or were they singing?
Yes,
Mhm.
but I don't remember
Overwhelmingly
anything else
black
about it. Yeah.
sharecroppers?
Yeah, I think it's better.
We
Some of us
had
worked
representatives of the union local on the
Yeah.
Rochdale farm that went to union meetings, but
And conferences and so
yes,
forth.
but union activities were never
Mhm.
really assumed any proportion at all in Mississippi.
Yeah.
I just don't think anything was going on in that
Mhm.
realm.
How would you characterize now? Was the cooperative venture basically a failure in economic terms, from your observation?
I think it, well, certainly it did not succeed in economic terms. No, it was subsidized. I think it helped a number of people, a few families, get a start, put them through a critical period. I think it helped a number of people to take one step up the ladder of economic security. Several people later moved up to the farm security projects 6 or 8 miles north, and the former manager there, Gene Cox, who lives in Memphis, has kept in touch with many of these families over the years, even 20 years later.
Well, there were a lot of things that the farm did that were sort of byproducts, like when they went there, the Negro children got how much? Black children were getting about 4 months of schooling,
About
so
Mhm.
our community building supplemented by, what, several more months? of
Yes.
schooling.
How did you do that? These are interesting.
Well, they had school for the black children on the farm and in the surrounding community who wanted to come in
Mhm.
at
Work campers
at
helped in
times
that.
when they were, because their school was only 3.5 to 4 months out of the year for the black children.
How long was the white children's school term?
White children's school was about 8 months, a regular
Mhm.
school term. However, I'd say that many poor white sharecroppers' children did not get to school because they were kept home to work at crop time
Yeah.
too, to chop cotton in the
Mhm.
spring and to pick it in the fall.
Actually, both farms, I think, neither one economically, I would say, a success, but the outreach in the community was the main
Mhm.
thrust in saying it.
Yeah.
Because down at Providence with so few families, we had, at our Christmas celebration, we had hundreds of people in our Sunday night
Mhm.
programs and in our credit union and to the store. The
Did
outreach
you
into
say
the
there
black
was a
community.
credit union at Delta as well?
I don't remember whether there
Was
was
it
a
at
credit
Providence?
union at Delta. I think the credit union got
Started
started
at
at
Providence.
Providence.
But there was a co-op store,
It was a co-op store.
and it succeeded, I mean, it
It-
remained
it
solvent
remained
and throughout this
Co-op store.
period.
It had even had dividends
Mhm.
the 3 or 4 years that I recall.
Mhm.
Uh,
What happened to the $5 a week board charge by the time you left? Was there still a staff?
Well, of course, I got married, but
yeah.
our grocery
What
bill
about
at
the-
the store rarely ran over $5 a
That's
week.
about our
Mhm.
grocery bill for the week.
Yeah.
1942. Milk was 5 cents a quart from the dairy, and we bought day-old bread in town at
Mhm.
5 cents. We didn't do much home baking, and
Mhm.
we got vegetables and eggs and things like that, so living expenses.
What did you
were-
do with yourself, Sue, after you married?
I guess, did I
That
help
period,
at the clinic?
Mhm.
I helped
Mhm.
at the clinic some.
Now, you said you had some very big, was it the Friday shot clinic for syphilis or something? Something was very big in numbers. You
Yes,
didn't
that-
remember the numbers of some of the
I
others.
tried to take Friday afternoon
Mhm.
off to go to town to go shopping, and that Friday morning we just didn't. Well, you never schedule patients anyway,
Mhm.
and the county health nurse would usually come up and bring all the materials,
Mhm.
the syringes and everything, and she'd get there usually by 6 o'clock or a little afterward, and we'd start.
Now, this is still the old pre-penicillin
Yes.
system at Delta.
And we, with Mrs. Cox's help and some other people for secretarial help and
Mhm.
the county health nurse, we would treat about 250 patients every Friday.
Mhm.
One interesting delivery, and I think I was trying my wife out this time. I got her to go on a delivery with me. A white patient was on a hot summer afternoon in the summer of 1940. She was the summer after the word came. And
I wasn't your wife then.
no, you were not my wife yet.
Okay.
To see how she would like country medicine. At any rate, we went back to this. It was dry at that time, and you could drive around to the house,
Mhm.
and you didn't have to go through the woods and the swamp or the bayou. And stayed with the lady who was having her 7th child,
Mrs.
and
McKnight.
Mrs.
wasn't it?
McKnight.
Hmm.
And she
You
looked
said your
like
memory wasn't good, but you did awful well.
Remember her.
She looked like she was about 65.
Mhm.
And there were so many flies around and no screens on the windows. We had a mosquito net on the bed
Mhm.
to try to keep the
Yeah.
flies away, and I tried to have some semblance of sterility. I carried a pack with a gown and drapes and sterile gloves and sterile sheet to put under the patient and all this type of thing. And I fixed up a syringe with some medicine in it, and Sue, who had never given an injection before, I told her, showed her how to do it, to pinch the skin and rub it with alcohol and stick the needle in and push the plunger when I told her to, because I didn't want to have to take off my gloves and change gloves. And so at the proper time, she gave the medicine as requested. And I don't know whether you've given any hypodermic injections since then or not. At any rate, she didn't faint, and we had a live baby, and everything was uneventful. Unfortunately, this same woman, the next year, and I can mention about Planned Parenthood efforts too, she did not come to our Planned Parenthood clinic, which was one of our main emphases at the time. And so she delivered the next year while we were away, just after we'd gotten married. And she unfortunately had a complication and died during the course of her labor. And her husband, who had children ranging from then about a month old on up to about 16 to 17, married a 18-year-old girl, and the family scattered.
This was a white woman.
Yeah.
It was a white woman. But
You would know by the missus if you were back in those days.
As-
You didn't dare call a black person
as one
missus
of
even
my
over the phone.
things, training for comes Carl, for Mississippi, I took 2 extra months of obstetrics and delivered about 5 babies a day for 2 months in a obstetrical hospital. And you want to cut it off a minute?
Yeah. To identify your more recent activity, okay? Something I probably should have done to start with. We got into describing a project in your youth, and this doesn't seem to be, oh, I know, it's this business. I wanted to be sure it was picking up voices and moving over there. It seems funny to talk about what you did, 35 years ago, and people calling it names and not identify what you've been doing more recently. I just want to be sure, and you confirm, you've been, you're past president of the Pima County Medical Society. What was the
Yes.
term that you, was it about 2 years ago or
1970.
1970? 3 years ago you would. And you're presently, I assume, medical director of Group Health of Arizona,
Yes.
which is launching the
Hopefully.
hopefully to launch a prepaid group health project. What other things that you have privileges, I assume, at several hospitals locally, or how do you?
I go primarily to one hospital, Tucson Medical Center, although I'm on the staff of St. Joseph's Hospital and on the staff of St. Mary's, but I don't go to either one of those just because of distance.
Right. And you came to Tucson when?
July 30th, 1956.
So that you, during the past 17 years, you've been a private practitioner
Yes.
in family practice in Tucson.
Sort of a link between his past life
Yeah.
and this, I think, is the Marana Clinic that he went to for so long.
Yeah, that's
so,
very important. How long
Taken
have you
over
been out there?
for the med school. He's
Well,
not
I went there
anymore.
for about 14 years, and I got out 3 years ago and persuaded the medical school to take it over. And there's
Okay.
now
How often did you go? Like a half a day a week, or 2 half days a week? How would you go to?
Well, I
this
started out
rural
going on
clinic?
Thursday afternoon, which is my afternoon off.
Mhm.
And initially, it was in the fall when '56 when there were really a lot of migrants, and I went every Thursday afternoon during the migrant season. Later, that dropped down to about 2 Thursdays a month.
What Marana, of course, is northwest of Tucson.
Agricultural
community.
About
And was
20.
there a nurse practitioner out there then, or what was the?
A nurse went out from Tucson with me on clinic days and went out on other days. There was a public health nurse who later on went out and held well baby clinics and prenatal clinics at some time. The year or two after it started, the school health nurse began to help us on clinic days. And
Who sponsored the building? Was a church involved, or?
the Arizona Migrant Ministry initially put up the funds, and then there was a community church that helped to sponsor it, and the local. One of the things that the farm people, or at least the board, was particularly interested in was in trying to bring some contraception or Planned Parenthood idea, concept to the people in that section who had little knowledge about it at all. And by connection with the Philadelphia Clinic, we were able to buy vaginal diaphragms, which was then the standard method, for about 15 to 25 cents a piece. And we bought the contraceptive jelly for very inexpensive. We buy it by the gross, and we bought condoms by the gross, which we dispensed to people to try to tell them to prevent gonorrhea, and which would be a very good idea to dispense freely today if you want to stop gonorrhea. Get the guys to use probes. But of course, when I first went to Mississippi, I was just out of a 2-year internship.
What you just described, you did just before you left for Mississippi in 1938. You went down to the Philadelphia
Planned Parenthood Clinic. I went down as a single 26-year-old, very young-looking individual, and they had been propagandizing all the women that, the new doctor would be able to give them something to keep them from getting pregnant. And I understood later that discussions went on back and forth among families, saying, well, I'm not going down there to that kid and let him, he's just a boy.
Yeah.
Or a husband saying that, that they were very hesitant about allowing their wives to participate in the program. But we did manage to do a fair amount there. And if I can make the transition from there to Providence after the war, we arrived there. I did a few weeks before my wife.
This is now in the spring of 46.
It's June of 46. After getting back from the Southwest Pacific, where I spent about 3 years, I took 3 months of refresher training at the University of Pennsylvania. And we debated and finally decided to go back to Mississippi rather than staying anywhere else. And I drove down and got...
What was the attraction? Let me stop just a minute. In other words, seems to me that you are not a terribly political person. You haven't mentioned it in this sequence, but do you remember the other evening in talking with you, you said when they coaxed you into going down to Mississippi, you were you're idealistic, and it was either do that or go to China, I think was one of the phrases. Do you mind going back to that? Because I'm trying to figure out your frame of mind as to what
I
you
went
thought
to
was
medical
happening.
school to prepare to go to China as a medical missionary. And I had some doubts about my abilities to perform. I viewed the missionary in China as somebody who was out and who did everything. And I did not particularly like surgery. And I took this opportunity of going someplace closer to home rather than going to China. And I think I was persuaded too by the fact that in college and later on that the question of race relations, black-white, in the South particularly, that I as a Southerner ought to go back and work in an area where I could say, I'm one of you.
Yeah.
Although as my wife earlier mentioned, if you came from North Mississippi, you were a Yankee
Mm-hmm.
in certain
That's
sections.
right.
But after coming back from the war, we did go through a period of soul searching and debating whether we should go back to Mississippi and I think it was at that time that this Group Health and Puget Sound offer came in. And we debated if we did go back to Mississippi, where would we settle? Should we settle in the county seat of Lexington of Holmes County, which would you become part of the medical establishment, because we had always been suspect in...
Had you ever joined organized medicine in that earlier Delta period?
Yes, I applied to two medical societies. I belonged to the State Medical Association, and I applied to what was called the Clarksdale and Six County Medical Society, and was accepted in membership. And I applied for membership in the Delta Medical Society also because I wanted to go to both of them. And my membership there was held up because of my,
Not till
quote,
7.
communist activity. So they asked me
didn't
to...
you tell me that oh, are you going to tell now how the doctor put in the...
Well, the doctor who had previously been doing the medical work for the farm at $100 a month
That was a retainer, really, in
Retainer.
addition to his other practice.
raised the question about my communist activities at the farm. And so instead of acting on my application routinely, I failed to get to the meeting at which it was held. They asked me to appear before their board to answer certain questions. So I got out of that by finding out that you could only belong to one of these two county societies, and I had already been accepted in a membership in one, so I wrote back and told them I was withdrawing my membership.
Yeah.
This was Clarksdale.
This was
You
Clarksdale.
belonged to Clarksdale and Six Counties. You didn't
Clarksdale
have
and
to
Six
belong to
County.
Delta.
But I went to both meetings and was accepted,
Yeah.
and really no...
What were most of the family practitioners in that area elderly people at that time or not?
Some of them probably hadn't even had a real med school, didn't you say?
Oh,
Some of them had sort of mail order
maybe some of them.
training.
It was all, in Bolivar County, it was a great mix.
Yeah.
We had a doctor in Hushpuckney, a white doctor who had a black wife,
Is that right?
who always...
Now this was real plantation country, huh?
Yes. And he was very elite. He always wore a coat, and he charged $50 for deliveries, and he had to be paid cash.
Yeah.
And he traveled to exclusive resorts with his black wife, rode on the
Very
Pullman.
interesting.
And that name,
And was
Hush Puppy,
tolerated.
fascinated me.
Hush Puppy.
Yeah.
It's Indian.
What was his background? Indian?
Well,
No.
that's the name of the
name?
place, and I think
Oh.
that's Indian.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Territory.
But it's just south of Mount Bio.
Mhm.
But I was accepted by the doctors. They were very cooperative. The only state aid that there was for poor people for hospitalization, the state legislature appropriated a certain amount of money each month
Mhm.
or each quarter, and it was allotted for the county to use, and the county money would usually be used up in the first 45 to 50 days of each quarter. And so if you got sick in the last part of the quarter, it was just tough.
Yeah.
The county funds would run out, and you just...
It was tough in what sense? The doctor didn't
Well-
get paid?
Well, no,
You couldn't get him into a hospital?
It was very difficult to get them into the hospital.
Are you talking about?
I'm talking about Bolivar County
Oh,
still.
okay.
Now, in Bolivar County, when you had a seriously ill patient who needed hospitalization, what did you do? You describe your house calls and
We
clinic.
tried to get them into there was a hospital in Cleveland, Mississippi, and we tried to get them in there on county funds because none of the patients that I had any funds. Those on the Farm Security Administration did have some scheme worked out where the government would help pay their hospital bill. Black patients, of course, the hospitals were segregated. I could either take up to Clarksdale or down to Rosedale. And in Rosedale, Mississippi, there was a very competent general practitioner type of person who did really excellent work under the circumstances. Very limited type of equipment, but really a skilled frontiers type man who I respected highly medically. And I don't know whether you want to jump to
Yeah, I think so.
post-war.
Yeah, I think so. We started it, and I think you've been very helpful in bridging back to there. There's an irony in history here in the fact that you've probably never been invited back to the Mountain Bayou thing, which is capitalized, it's funded. Have you ever gone back to
Yes,
see
I was
it?
offered
Oh.
a job by Dr. Geiger.
But did you ever go see the place or
No.
anything? They really ought to,
They asked-
historically.
They asked me to come back and
yeah.
visit, and it's interesting that
Yeah.
they tried, they were
Mhm.
saying what wonderful things they were doing. They were having a cooperative garden. They were doing all these things we had done 30 years
Yeah,
before.
right.
And it failed,
Yeah.
really.
Well, let me, that's just something I want to file away together with a couple of other things, because I'm trying to think, Brent Oldham is this very bright chairman of the board of Group Health, GHA of Washington, D.C. And he was on that three-man committee that went into Mountain Bayou. Really, about 70, I'd say, maybe a little older. I'm guessing somewhere 65, 75. He looks like he's asleep. He's not a bit asleep. He's taking in everything, So that I remember staying up drinking with him, with the black mayor of Mountain Bayou and a couple of young left revolutionary blacks and a few things like that, and he'd sit there, and I thought he was dozing. I got my comeuppance real quick, because as the conversation got very political and sharp between a OEO guy who was defending the administration and these left kids, all of a sudden he, zammed into that whole thing, and he's stupid, he said, what in the hell are you trying to build, a Chinese wall around Mississippi, and he began to make political comments about the whole business, and he would be the kind of guy that would have a political grasp, which I found missing in visiting this thing. Not that Jack Geiger may not have one or something, but they're probably in the modern way about as mixed up as some of us were, back then, in the sense of they really argue in a lot of details, and they need to back off once in a while and probably
Don't really know.
get
where they're going.
have a visitor like yourself drop in, to just talk, a seminar with them for a day or two about the way it was.
It would be interesting to go back and see what it's like.
Some of those elderly black people I saw in the exam rooms would have been young women almost, in that period, but they were, out of this old era completely that it'd be good to them to bridge to somebody that knew it. In other words, I found a
There need to be
tremendous
a lot of
gap
bridges.
between, for instance, how do they get doctors into Mountain Bayou? Now, sometimes they get a couple of gals who are inseparable, problem cases, liberals out of Los Angeles, various black-white marriages, that type of thing again. But I was looking over the staff, how difficult their recruiting is, in terms of, it isn't that every one of the 7 or 8 doctors were an oddball, but they were a considerable, number of extreme cases of, and these people now are much more aware with TV and all the patients' work, I think, of, the gap between them and.
Well,
Tell me about the nurse now. They're living where, in Memphis, Tennessee,
They're-
and Gene Cox? Or where are they?
Yes.
I just thought while we file away this older period, we get the...
Well,
Gene
they-
is a guy that is invaluable if anybody's looking for clippings. He has his own personal clipping service on the south and way back from
Yeah, he-
STFUI, and Gene
He's
has,
collected.
Gene still has everything on
He's
it.
collected all the papers and has
Yeah.
given them to the Mississippi State Historical
Society.
Department.
And where are they on deposit?
I think
in Mississippi
at
somewhere?
the Mississippi State University.
well, then didn't he?
Now, what about Gene? Tell me what you know about
Well,
him. He's located where
Gene,
now? With
well,
his wife?
after we left Rochdale, Gene and his wife Lindsay moved to Holmes County,
Mhm.
Providence,
Yeah.
and he took over the operations
Yeah.
of that and was there during the war. Drove his buggy to
Mhm.
town during gasoline rationing days and things
Yeah.
like that. And Lindsay carried on quite a practice at that time in cooperation with the doctors around.
Mhm.
She would see some patients
Mhm.
and carried on some limited amount of treatment. There was no doctor to back her up, so she didn't. She was,
She's from Japanese missionary background.
delivered
She's
a
quite
few babies on her
pioneer
own
stock,
and
yeah.
other
Mhm.
things like that, and
I mean, missionaries to Japan.
influenced us to
Mhm.
really to go back. And as I said, the question of whether we would settle in Providence, which was the farm actually was 8 miles out from Chula, Mississippi, off the main highway on a gravel road.
Mhm.
It was 18 miles from Lexington, the county seat.
That was your decision whether to settle in the
Well,
county
to settle
seat
in
or
the
out.
town of
Or-
Chula or Lexington or
Mhm.
build a clinic out at the farm.
Mhm.
And
Or
we,
not to go back.
or not to go back at all. But when
Yeah.
we decided to
Much
go back,
indecision.
Yeah.
they took the old dairy, which had gone defunct during the war, because everybody went off to work in the shipyards, and they remodeled it partially. We came up with several rooms. We installed the X-ray equipment that we'd gotten,
Mhm.
been sitting there
Yeah.
for 4 years
Sorority.
during
Right.
the war from the AKA sorority.
Mhm.
Probably a relic.
And finally moved. Work hadn't been completed when we arrived in June of 46, and Sue reminds me of my first patient. About 5:30 in the morning,
Got settled in that new house on the hill
Yeah.
with boxes all around and
Somebody-
whippoorwills all night.
somebody knocked on the door and said, "Doctor, you coming down to the office?" And I said, "Yes." A little later on, there's an emergency. Well, sort of emergency. Said, "It's about my wife. I want you to see my wife." And I said, "All right, just a minute." So I got dressed, and he'd parked his car down at the bottom of the hill. There's about a block and a half winding hill up to
Mhm.
my house. And I followed him down there, and we went on down to the clinic and went in and asked her what her trouble was. And he spoke for her. He said, "Well, it's this way. We had been hearing that when the new doctor came that you would be able to have something to keep us from having so many children." And
That was our first
He
emergency.
Now, that was your first emergency.
I said, "How many children do you have?" He said, "We have 12. And I said,
We decided it wasn't an
"Fine."
emergency.
Yeah.
So without a nurse attendant or anything at all, she went in the examining room, and I examined her, and I fitted her with the diaphragm and instructed her and gave her some things, and they never had any more children. So it was the first person.
How old would you say they were? In their 30s maybe? Or?
In late 30s, early 40s probably,
Yeah.
because one of his children was 22 or 3,
Yeah.
one of the older ones.
That was an early emergency.
But that was the
morning.
Our
first
first
patient, and he come down. He wanted to be sure and be on.
Had you started a family already? Did you have children?
Yes, our son was born in an Army hospital.
Mhm.
Walter
in
Reed.
Walter Reed. I went into the service in August of 42, and we got to West Palm Beach and were immediately shipped out to Washington for 2 months at Walter Reed. And while we were there, my son was born in September
September 42.
September 21st,
Right.
22nd, 1942, which
Yes.
was it?
Mhm.
At any rate, so he was born there during our stay in Washington.
Mhm.
And then there was a 4-year gap while I was away during the war, and then the next 2 children, girls, were born in Mississippi.
Mhm.
46
after
and
the war,
48.
46
They
and
delivered
48.
Susan. The surgeon didn't quite get there at Greenwood.
Yeah, my daughter, we went 25 miles to the Greenwood Hospital in another county and called the doctor, and he started out and had a flat tire and had to go back and borrow his wife's car. By the
So
time he
you
got
got
to the
scrubbed
hospital,
already.
Yeah.
I delivered my own daughter. And I let him finish up after that and was glad to get out of it.
Well, now let's go on with Holmes County. You're up on this hill. You've got the converted dairy as
Dairy.
your clinic, huh?
And it gradually became,
It's really, are you now related to the project in the same direct way, or are you more
I'm still on the board. The name.
No, he didn't.
Oh.
I don't think Mike means now.
Oh.
He means
In,
Oh.
at
point
this
in
point.
time then.
Yeah, in point of time then.
Yeah.
The project
At that
was-
time, what
The
was your
project had no
relationship?
money
Yeah.
to pay me anything. And I said, I'll see if I can make it as a private practitioner.
Okay.
And,
It's a different board.
well, some of the board had changed.
Yeah.
Amerson and one of the other people had resigned because they
Yeah.
had thought, but
Different.
the board had
I don't know if you know of Will Campbell. Is Will still on the board?
well,
was chaplain
Will
at Ole
came
Miss
after
and
the
left.
later on. Providence Cooperative Farm, or Delta Cooperative Farm and Providence Cooperative Farm went out of existence, and they incorporated as Delta Foundation Incorporated.
That's what it was when you returned, Delta Foundation Incorporated.
Either then or a little
shortly
later on.
Okay.
And then it.
Do you think of anyone else that was connected with it?
Well,
at that
Camel,
time?
who
Mhm.
runs the Fellowship of Southern Churchmen and is a former Baptist preacher and union worker and
Mhm.
chaplain at Ole Miss and so on and so forth.
He was active.
Was active then. There was not really much active board
You
work
got to
going
speak
on.
of. Who was the
because
manager at Providence?
Mr. Cox.
I see. He'd gone over and was still
was
there
the
in those
manager
years.
there.
Mhm.
And we had a cooperative store and a credit union.
About
And
how many families?
There were only, by that time, only about 6 families living on the farm. 1 white and 5 black families. And
The clinic really came to be the main activity.
Yeah,
didn't
it
you?
Yeah.
sounds like,
Yeah.
you know, the side issue
Yes.
has become the main
Yes.
issue, you know.
the
Yeah.
farm, which was
That's
about
right.
2,400 acres, gradually got sold off, some land here and there, to sort of keep things going.
Yeah.
And they sold timber, and Mr. Cox was not aggressive in wanting to get government money and to design government projects. We started out paying nothing for rent at the clinic, nothing for house rent. But as
They gave you the home up on the hill that you spoke
Right.
of. Mhm.
but as the clinic, we of course bought and dispensed medicines, and
What equipment? What did they give you? Examining tables, and office furniture?
we had we finally acquired a couple of fairly nice examining tables, and we still had our the old thin frame army type examining table, and we had some wooden slabs that we used for physiotherapy and EKG, and had about when it was finally remodeled, we ended up with 3 rooms in which we had surplus army beds that you bought for $6 a piece, in which we could keep patients overnight if necessary, and 4 or 5, actually I had about 7 treatment rooms and an office and a lab, and we had 2 waiting rooms, but there was no label.
Yeah, but
And
the blacks went to
People
one and the
separated
the
whites
blacks
went
went
to
to one and the whites went to another. Sometimes the whites went into the big, comfortable looking waiting room which had the best air conditioner in it, and they were a little surprised when later blacks came in and sat down by them, but there were no,
Yeah.
everybody
Weren't
came.
too many whites really who came.
Came
Few
front
people
door.
from town.
It was a majority black practice like the county was.
I'd say we had about 80, 90%.
But
black
that
practice.
did resemble the population of the county in
Yes.
that extent.
But I had patients who would call me on a house call, and I would see them in town, or I would see them at home, but
Because we belonged to the Chula Presbyterian Church.
They would be whites essentially.
White.
is that right?
but very few of those would come to see me at the office. They would go to Greenwood or Jackson or New Orleans or places like that.
Yeah.
Some of them would. And it's a very interesting mix. And interestingly, again, here the economic competition came in, because before I came, the old Dr. Kazar, who's now dead, in Chula,
He was a character.
was the farm doctor.
Mhm.
And of course, when I came, then I cut out that part of his practice, plus beginning to take some of his other patients. So he
Now, this
started
was-
saying I was a communist.
This was a parallel to the earlier Delta experience in
Yes.
a way. He had been brought up there on retainer or on some other basis to do the work.
Yes.
Were there any plantations in Holmes County with the same pattern that you
Oh, the
described?
pattern was the same.
And
We were right at
after
the
the
edge
war-
of the hills. See, we had
All right.
Delta, and then we lived on the first.
So
edge.
that in the level country, some of it was Delta country. You
I-
were at the edge of it.
Yes, and I actually, over a period of years, developed about accounts with about 15 to 20 plantations who would send me a note, please treat so-and-so, and send me the bill.
Okay.
So I was
Now,
accepted.
how would they
by-
pay? So you began to see it from the point of view of the doctors. In a way, the system hadn't changed.
No.
Would they pay you monthly? Would they pay you
Uh,
prior to the settlement of the
Some
cost?
of them paid me monthly.
They were advancing the money ahead of time.
Right.
for settlement.
Most of them actually paid their bills monthly and paid pretty well. There was one man who was a deacon in the Methodist Church who was a deadbeat from the word go,
Yeah.
and ran up a bill of over $1,000, which he never paid. And I found out he'd been sued by every doctor in the county, by
You were just the
wholesale
new
grocers,
sucker.
and I was the new sucker.
This old
But-
Dr. Kazar was really more or less a quack, but he was interesting. He used some of the, well, really African voodoo and mysticism, which of course was very strong among the black people. Mixed it in with his little knowledge of medicine that he had. He was older than Dave, and he would, do the bit of tying the strings on the bedpost and burning it, and all the voodoo bit, and helped
He
him
was a
along
white
with his-
man, but he
Yes,
went along
Dr.
with
Kazar.
playing the game out.
Yeah, he played the game with the blacks, and of course.
And that was
Dave
very
had to,
real.
too. Yeah, I think it all. We have a brother-in-law who was a surgeon in the Congo, and we've talked over these things. That being hexed and fixed is a real thing.
I had a patient that, with two specific ones that come to mind. One, a woman that was very much overweight, and she went from 200 down to 100 pounds without any dieting at all. We couldn't find anything the matter with her. And finally she began to recover and get a little better. And she came in later to tell me, she said, I think I ought to tell you what really happened. That light-skinned brown girl moved into the house, and she started putting something in the flour that she made my husband's biscuits from, and said it wasn't 2 months before he had fallen in love with her, and in 6 months he left.
Yeah.
And said that was what was
all.
killing me. That's why I couldn't eat.
Yeah.
And said,
Now, how'd you solve that?
I didn't solve it. He left
He
finally,
left.
and she resolved it.
Yeah.
She accepted the outcome. She
Yeah.
kept the kids and stayed home. Her parents moved in with her.
How long did the farm, Gene Cox, the manager, would sell off parts of it? The farm enterprise really is kind of small as a farm enterprise. You don't
It's
even have a
still-
sawmill, maybe.
No,
like
there was
Delta
a
or other
sawmill
things.
for a while.
Mhm.
There was a dairy for a while. They cut timber.
But by the time you got back, the dairy part
The
was
dairy
gone.
part had
All right.
gone. The sawmill was not operating.
And 6 families is not very much of an
Not-
operation.
It was.
Were there empty houses then? Had there once been a bigger?
There were 2 or 3 empty houses, but older, sort of pensioned off people were allowed to live in them.
Yeah.
And there.
They really were living on donations from national liberals and churches and that type of
No, the
thing,
people that lived there were working there.
No, but I meant the farm enterprise per se, except...
Well, it received very little.
Oh.
It received no further donations.
So he
after
had to
that.
sell off periodically
And
just
you
to
had
keep the
to
budget.
sell some land.
Mhm.
Some of the land we tried to get a drainage district
Mhm.
put through. Some of the land became subject to overflow, and what
Mhm.
when they bought it was good cotton land eventually became good timberland.
Mm-hmm.
And to show you how things changed, they paid, I think, $20,000 for the land, and everybody said they got cheated.
How many acres? About 2,000 originally? Was that what you said on the
I
Delta?
think it was around 2,000
Mhm.
acres. And just a few months ago, Mr. Cox sold the timber off of 300 acres for $41,000. He
That's
said,
what was left, was the 300?
oh no,
Or
there's,
there's
there's
still more?
1,700 acres left.
So what, they've still got a non-profit that still owns this, or did they ever have to
No,
disperse
it's
it?
still nonprofit.
There's a head start on the place.
And
Still,
There must be a board, there must be some structure that has to handle all
most
this,
of it
huh?
is Mr. Cox.
Yeah,
And
holding it
occasionally
together.
when we go
give
back,
some scholarships to black kids and so
yeah,
forth.
we drive down over the line into the Mississippi,
Yeah.
into the first town, and have a board meeting.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You go back with him, huh?
Yeah. And
Well,
we'll
he's
go-
living in where, in Memphis?
Memphis.
Mhm.
But the clinic gradually picked up because there were a lot of independent black farmers and
Yeah.
white farmers up in the
Mhm.
hill section because doctors were needed.
Right,
I soon developed a very busy practice.
right.
What was the
And
record Saturday? I'll never
I
forget
could
it.
see, well, record Saturday, I think I had 85 patients. Now, I don't see how some of these doctors who have
Yeah.
a clinic can say they say 60 patients, but I had 85 patients with a nurse to help me and Sue to help at the
Yeah.
office. And we would charge $1 or $2 per visit.
For office visits. Right.
And that included during
What years are you speaking of, generally?
46 to 56.
Okay, 46 to 56.
And that included doing a urine or maybe a blood count or a
Mhm.
sickle cell test
Yeah.
and furnishing medicine, giving them a shot.
You didn't have much overhead, but but your gross couldn't have been a great deal if that was your record.
Gross wasn't very great.
Were you going to a
but-
hospital or doing anything?
No, I did no hospital work. I was 18 miles from the county hospital. It was too far.
So for those 10 years, you were actually in
Just-
fair isolation professionally until you got to...
I developed a very good relationship with a doctor who was a good general surgeon in Lexington, which is 18 miles
Mhm.
away, and a Dr. Sandifer in 25 miles away in the other direction, who had the whites and blacks were in different parts of the same hospital in Lexington, and
Mhm.
Sandifer had the black hospital
Mhm.
in Greenwood. And they were both excellent general surgeons who would treat anybody, anytime, day or night,
Mhm.
and not ask whether you had money or not.
Yeah,
And
that took some doing to find them.
they were
Still does.
really backed us up.
Mhm.
I had support right down the line from the doctors in that area. But the clinic did bring in a fair amount, and I started paying, I think,
Paid Lindy?
$60 a month rent at the clinic, $35 to the house. I paid the nurse's salary probably $150, and later maybe $200 a month. So
You didn't have a nurse to start with in 46, or did you?
Oh no, Miss Cox started working.
She,
with
I see, but you were able to take
She had 3 children.
her responsibility away
On.
from the co-op's
Right.
budget.
You trained Shirley in the lab. You paid
Yes,
her.
one of the local white women who had 6 children of her own would come in and work from 7 to 10 at night.
Mhm.
Ms. Cox would go home, and then
Mhm.
I'd go back and work another 3 hours at night. And
What was an average day? You gave a record day. What would an
average day would
like?
be 45 to 50
Mhm.
a day.
Of course,
And if
no
you
way
say-
of making appointments, you know. 'cause
No, and
someone
if you
would
if you
start
if you
and-
charged $1 or $2, what percentage of the people though couldn't get up
We never
any money?
sent, one year, we sent out,
When we were gonna leave, we sent out bills.
well, we sent out bills, but a couple of years before that, I sent out bills. It was the first time that I'd really billed any patients that I'd seen.
It was 8 years after you'd
It's
started.
fantastic. In 1 month of December, I collected $5,000, most money that we'd ever seen at any one time.
Yeah.
I think I came out in 53 or so with a net of about maybe $8,000.
Yeah, it couldn't have been very much. If you had people not paying, and you had this $1 and $2 and no hospital income.
You know,
couldn't have-
people might start in the morning to come to the doctor, and they all pay a little bit to come along in the car, and then the car break down, 10 miles out of the road, and they might not get there till late afternoon. You just never knew, They
Mhm.
always had to pay besides paying the doctor, often they
Pay
lost their money
transportation,
paying
yeah,
somebody
right.
to ride in their car with them. So
The
then,
first-
not
first
everybody
5
had a car then.
First
That's
5
right.
years we're there, we had no telephone.
Now, what do you mean by that?
Well,
None
we
at the
had,
clinic?
No
Mr.
place.
Mr. Cox fixed
Mhm.
up
Little
Uh,
grinding kind.
mhm.
the local
Yeah.
type of telephone. He's quite a
Mhm.
telephone buff,
Mhm.
and we could talk from the clinic to the phone, and after 5 years got telephone service.
All right, you came in 46 to Holmes County,
Right.
and it simply was so rural that Bell Telephone, despite applications, gave you no telephone service, even as a physician.
Right.
Were you the only doctor in the county without a telephone?
Yes.
Were you more rural, much more rural than any of the others?
No one in that area of the county had phones.
Oh, but we were more
Yeah.
rural than
We're-
any doctor.
Oh,
The
yeah.
other doctors were all at
They were
least
all
in
in
a
town.
populated place.
Oh, they
of
were
some
all in
kind.
Tula
town.
had
Tula,
1,000 people.
Yeah.
Now, Lexington had 2,500 to 3,000 and others, so.
Right. Well, I think this is very important. Otherwise, we don't get the pick. I mean, here's what Sue just said, that transportation was a major problem. as
People
it
would-
continues
People would
to be.
spend their
Come up
money
the
to get
hill
to the
and-
doctor.
And then no telephone.
And
And then no money by the time they got
Yeah.
to
Now, what about house calls in this 46-56 period?
you're supposed to, the standard charge for a house call is supposed to be $1 a mile. And some of the doctors were pretty hearted about it, and people, before they called the doctor, knew they better, if it was
Mhm.
25 miles, they better have $25, or
Mhm.
he wasn't,
Mhm.
he
A
wasn't gonna
couple of
come.
times, people would call several.
How many would you
doctors.
make on average
Uh,
a day or
I
a
made
week?
more house calls there. I'd say they would average
every
4 or 5 or
direction.
6 a day.
Mhm. When
But-
would you try to bunch them or not?
Well, yes, because Chula, which was our town 8 miles away where the kids went to school and where we bought most
Mhm.
groceries and things like
Mhm.
that, I had a lot of patients in Chula, and I would maybe drive in at a certain time or go in early, and I would see 3 or 4 patients
Mhm.
there. Or there was a Farm Security Administration project, which was black, 15 miles south of Chula, or 8 miles south of Chula,
Mhm.
and I would see.
Was this
Try to
like
group
30
those.
acre or 40 acre plots
Yes.
they'd given the people?
Right.
Dave Chula makes me think of the story about the little old lady that you had to go across the footbridge.
Yeah, 1948, the Civil Rights Bill was being debated in Congress. And a cold winter night, I was called to see a little black lady who was about probably 80 years old and had spent most of her life working for white people who lived across the highway. Blacks and whites lived pretty much intermingled.
Yeah,
Back
Yeah,
to back.
in the rural area, sure.
well, right in the little town, there'd be
Yeah.
white houses and black houses just on the back alley.
Mhm.
And but Aunt Cindy, as she was known, lived between the highway and the railroad. And when the water backed up into what was called Chula Lake in the wintertime, you had to walk a footbridge to get to her house. There were about 4 houses over there. So I went to see her about 1 o'clock in the morning, and there must have been around 20 neighbors gathered in the house, and a fire in the fireplace, and a little one, probably 15-watt bulb or kerosene lantern, I don't know which it was, burning anyway. There wasn't much light in the room. And she was back in a big double bed back in the corner away from the fire where it was very cold. And they said she'd been pretty sick and coughing, and I went over and examined her and listened to her chest and decided, besides her heart trouble, she had a little bronchopneumonia. And I'd gotten to giving her some medicine, and she motioned to me to come back over, and she said, "Doctor," I couldn't imagine what she was going to say. She said, "Do you think the President's Civil Rights Bill is going to pass Congress?"
Not a good one.
And
Wonderful.
I said, if Mrs. Jones or Mrs. So-and-so who lives across the highway over there and Aunt Cindy works for her had any idea that she was keeping up with
Yeah.
what's going on in Congress,
Well,
they
she
would
was
have,
keeping house for them, yeah.
they would not believe it,
Yeah.
that this is what she was interested in.
Right.
And that was outstanding.
How did you and Sue, you were in fair isolation except for the Coxes. Was the staff otherwise, did it consist of any other educated or intellectual people?
No.
All right.
Some white
How did you
families.
stay in touch?
With whom our kids.
All right, white families,
Right,
but
yeah.
they'd be fairly prejudiced, right? And how did you
Well-
discuss politics or
Well,
intellectual
Cox's
matters?
and I both lived up on houses sort of on the hill, and we visited back and forth. The kids
Yeah.
would run through the woods past the spring, and we could visit easily. And,
We took part in some church activity.
we joined a discussion group in Greenwood, Mississippi, in the library, which was started by a liberal Episcopal
Mhm.
person up there who was later accused of being communist and had his house shot at when things got hot in the 60s. And I think even the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission has got information we belong to this communist discussion group because
A
we
great
discussed
books group or
Yeah.
something.
yeah,
it's
to discuss
probably-
philosophy.
Mhm.
But we chose Ms. Cox, and my wife and I, and Mr. Cox said he would go along with this, belonged to the local Presbyterian church. We went to church every Sunday, and the kids went to Sunday school. Although my
That
wife
gave you an essential social
It wasn't
attachment.
really much social life. Our
Wasn't?
kids were growing up and we were busy. No,
Yeah.
it was pretty
We invited kids from town of their age out for birthday parties,
Mhm.
and they were invited to their birthday parties, and we had birthday parties at school.
The,
And
the Holmes County setup was not outlaw, in quotes, in the same sense that you described some of the mood at Delta.
Not really.
The mood became
until 54.
Well, right, they,
That's when
Yeah.
the watershed was, when the
the
Supreme
Supreme Court decision sharpened everything in Mississippi.
Everybody
Yeah.
began to wonder
If
what
you
we were
believed in the
doing
U.S.
out
flag,
there.
you were a communist. I mean, you were.
So that's when the crisis
And
came,
interesting that
mass media.
Miss,
But
Did-
46 to 54, you didn't feel.
no, we
That's
we were
right.
perfectly
really.
accepted. We were invited out socially. We went out to several different plantation owners' homes. We were on good terms with them. Invited out to
Well,
dinner.
they've had some
They came
patients
out
who
to
were
dinner at our house. I was
plantation
Would any plantation owners, that's what I wanted to ask you, that some of them would turn to you for medical
You
care
had-
Oh,
in
yeah.
some
You
cases,
had
in
them.
this period?
More
I
the
had some of
wives
the
than
more
the-
Not at Delta, though?
out.
was another-
Some of our nearby neighbors were,
Okay.
just 2 or 3.
But here it was more of an acceptance.
I had some of the people in the church that I saw,
Mhm.
quite a number of white patients. actually.
Even though you were, say, 75 or 80% black practice, I
Right.
think you described, okay. Because
And,
that did resemble the county. then.
One very violent anti-black
Mhm.
guy who turned against us later on
Mhm.
came to me. His father was a Presbyterian minister, and but 54. Shortly after that, Mr. Cox was in Greenwood, in the post office cafe,
Mhm.
and he overheard some white men talking, and he was just sitting there eating coffee,
Mhm.
and drinking coffee, and eating a piece of pie, and reading the paper, and they didn't know him,
Mhm.
and he heard them talking about, what are we going to do about this thing? And he said, well, I know what we're doing. In Indianola, we organized a White Citizens Council
Mhm.
and said, we're going to put a stop to this.
Mhm.
Anybody that's not for us is against us.
Mhm.
You're going to have to stand up
Yeah.
and say
You
what
know
you think.
P.D. East and the Pedal Paper and all his fight against the
Yeah, how
Citizens
far was he
Council.
from you in location?
PD was down in Hattiesburg, south of us.
What
Pedal-
about Greenwood?
Pedal-
Did
Pedal,
Greenwood have a
Mississippi.
liberal newspaper? I'm trying to
Pedal,
remember what I knew.
Mississippi.
Or was it
Not-
Greenville?
Greenville, Harding
Greenville.
Carter.
Harding Carter.
Harding Carter was a
Carter
Greenville.
was, oh,
Harding
yes.
befriended us in our time of trouble.
Yeah.
Now, your troubles, you really got into troubled circumstances from the Supreme Court decision and the White Citizens
People
Council.
began
Yeah.
to
That's
You were outlaw if you weren't going with the
saying
worst.
saying
racism.
things
right.
and
Began to get
suspecting things.
suspicious.
Mhm.
And we had, my wife taught my Sunday school class one time, and she said, I guess the question was that communism,
Mhm.
what communism was,
Mhm.
should be taught in the schools. In other
Mhm.
words, people
Yeah.
should be informed. They,
Yeah.
should, it exists. You should know
Yeah,
about it.
right, what is it?
So that got out that my wife had said that children should be
I did
taught
it.
to be communist.
At one time.
So I was asked by the session to resign from the Sunday school class over the protests of 2 of the daughters of the session who wrote letters in my
And
defense.
this is how fearful they were.
But
One
I
day
resigned anyway.
Excuse me, I think I still have.
This was
the-
by 55 or already in, was it happening very rapidly?
But very rapidly, 54.
I think our church bulletin, I think I still have the bulletin, had an instruction to the deacons not to seat any Negroes
Mhm.
in the true Presbyterian church
Yeah.
parade.
And they took an ad in the paper,
Mhm.
the county paper,
Mhm.
that this was the action of the church officers, that no blacks would be.
They were making sure they were acceptable to the White Citizens Council. Tone was
Well, word got out because my wife
Mhm.
wrote a card
Always is right.
to one of the black families who lived out on another rural route
Mhm.
to come to the service, which was at Providence on third Sunday afternoon, at which we had
Movies.
movies and religious things. I may have mentioned these to you before, and in the story I told you the other night. And the card was evidently read by the
Mhm.
whoever delivered the card and thought of inviting the church to Chula. So this is when this action
Yeah.
took place.
This was a response, really,
But,
to fear.
Then we got into it by virtue of the fact that we had a very liberal, I say liberal, we had a crusading independent woman editor in the Holmes County newspaper.
Oh, you did?
We still
Lexington
take her paper,
Advertiser.
Hazel Smith, she's been written up in time.
And she's got
What's her name?
Hazel Brannon Smith.
Mhm.
She's
And
won
she
a
stood up
Pulitzer
against the
Prize.
White Citizens Council.
Well, she got into trouble as being one of these reporters who reported what went on in court.
Mhm.
And the judge cited her, or she wouldn't reveal the source of some information. The judge cited her for contempt of court, and she appealed it and won it in the state Supreme Court, and had the case thrown out. Later, she was a very curious mixture, and we began to get better
She married a
acquainted
guy
with her.
from Tempe, Midian. She
Uh,
got her husband.
and she had, she crusaded against a sheriff that got elected, because she said he's a prominent Baptist, but he's assessing every bootlegger $2 a case for every bit of whiskey that comes into the county.
How did she
And-
keep her advertising and survive?
Well,
Every time we went back, she was broke.
later on,
Current.
she, yeah, let's give him a copy of the paper. Well, the sheriff vowed to get her,
Mhm.
and he thought he could get her in one way or another. And in one instance, the sheriff used to go around and collect all the money that was on the tables
She's
in the
still
various
at it.
Mhm.
various Negro
Weekly,
gambling
you know.
places Saturday nights. Got one of my patients, stopped him on the highway in Chula, and told him to get out of his car. And he got out of his car, and he hit him over the head with his big long flashlight.
Mhm.
And the guy started to run, and so he shot him in the back of the thigh. And they brought him out to me, and the bullet had gone through. I x-rayed his thigh, and there was no bullet in there. And I seen that it had gone in the back and out the front. And Hazel Smith got hold of the story, and she called me up, and I told her what had happened. And the headlines the next week was, "Local sheriff shoots black in the back."
She's had crosses burned on her.
And so our forces
Yeah.
were joined.
She was a little safer than you know, and just living in Lexington, huh? At least where.
No,
people
they
are.
burned crosses in her yard.
I just meant maybe not
They
being as
fired-
isolated.
Interesting, they fired her husband, who was hospital administrator, for
Yeah.
a while to get at her.
Yeah.
Smitty was
They
smooth.
took all the advertising out from her. They started a competitive paper. She weathered the whole thing. She got
Yeah.
money from the Friends Service
Mhm.
Committee, from union
That's
groups,
how she had to
and so
go
on and
through
so
it.
forth.
She was
Yeah.
a friend of Hunting Carter's.
Yeah.
Were there any other friends
But,
like that, or was she?
Oh, he
pretty-
sued her for libel,
Mhm.
and
The sheriff.
The sheriff did, and I was called to testify.
Mhm.
And the only questions asked me, well, the defense
Yeah.
asked me the question, the story, and I
Well,
told them what had
well,
happened. And the prosecution got up and asked me a question, where do you live, and so on and so forth. And they said, do you live on Providence Cooperative Farm? And I said, yes. And he said, that's all.
They didn't want to know whether the bullet entered from the rear, huh?
They-
That
they would-
condemned.
That I was out, and she lost it in Holmes County because it was 12 white jurors. She appealed it to the state Supreme Court, and she won it in the Mississippi State Supreme Court. She had it thrown out. The libel suit was thrown out. But the White Citizens Council then began to, anybody that did anything, you were supposed to.
You know, that was in the society column in those days. The Citizens Council will meet at so-and-so's house or at the so-and-so's
Mhm.
church, just like the Ku
Yeah.
Klux Klan would be.
So 54 to 56 were rough, weren't they?
Um,
Until you left. I mean, they were a rough period of potential violence.
Roughness
right?
came right after the mass meeting. It didn't really.
yeah, the
start much
roughness, as far as any threats
Mhm.
came after me,
Which mass meeting, about when?
that was in September the 22nd to September the 25th, 1955.
Mhm.
And they'd had some black boys who had whistled at
You
some
were
white
telling
girls.
Mhm.
I think I told you the other night.
Mhm.
And they tape recorded their stories.
That's where you got turned off on tape recording.
And,
Okay.
and then they called a mass meeting at the Chula Consolidated School, and we were invited to attend.
Yeah.
And I was warned ahead of time by some of my white friends that they had some incriminating evidence on us, and it was going to be very serious. And
How big was the crowd?
Ooh, I saw them coming. I
crowded.
went to
There were
pick up the
300 or
kids
more.
from a
Mm.
Little League
men,
football game.
mostly men.
Mm-hmm.
And after I'd had my say, and
What was the issue now in which you
well,
had
they
your
were
say?
accused of biracial
swimming.
swimming, of biracial meetings, of
The whole Providence
the whole
operation
question of
was it?
integration.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, integration was the issue.
And before I had really had anything to say, or Mr. Cox had been invited to speak, and they did allow us to get up and speak, a big, tall fellow, about 6'2", named Bobo Foose, that had been born and raised there, 2 generations right there, got up and he was furious.
Mhm.
And he says, I've known Dr. Minter for
Mhm.
9 years. He's treated my family. He's a Christian
Plantation owner.
gentleman, and I'll have nothing to do with whatever you're doing here tonight. I think it's very unfair, and I'm leaving. And he walked out.
Mhm.
But he was alone.
But he was alone.
Mhm.
But
He knew the mood of the crowd.
He went outside, and he and John Edgar Hayes and some other young planters that I knew were prepared to intervene if anybody tried anything rough. They later told me that. But we were invited to speak, and I told a little bit what was going on. I thought of all the things I could have said afterwards, and quoted scripture and everything
Sure,
else,
yeah,
which I
but that's-
couldn't think of at the moment. And they asked Cox to talk, and they kept heckling him and so on and so forth. And finally somebody said, well, what do you think about segregation? He said, well, to put it in a nutshell, segregation is unchristian, period. Upside down.
That did it.
And somebody said, I make a motion that Cox and Minter be asked to leave Holmes County. Somebody seconded it, and the chairman called for a vote, and there was an overwhelming vote in favor, and asked, are there any opposed? And the 3 of us voted against it. Cox and I got up, and a preacher friend that
Yeah.
had known my father got up
Mhm.
from across the county, got up and voted with us. And he'd been kicked out of his church within a month.
Within a month, he was thrown
He
out
was
of his
gone.
church.
Yeah.
It took a
That was
parade.
terrible time.
Yeah.
And
And there were people, of course, this was happening, you know,
All
we
over
got
the South,
lots of
yes.
letters, but, you know, the people at
Yeah.
Conan Nia wrote us, I still.
Harding Carter
Yeah,
called,
yeah,
invited us
all over
over,
the
said,
South.
how are things, rough? We said, yeah, they're a little rough. The sheriff.
No reporter had covered it. He hadn't.
Oh yeah.
There were
Oh, it
people
was
from
in
the
the commercial appeal.
No, I mean they had people from
Yeah,
the liberal
Times Picayune, the New
Good,
York
yeah.
Post.
Yeah.
After that.
We
yeah.
had, oh, it was very, it was.
Harding wrote one of the best
Yeah.
It was exciting time. Somebody came
Yeah.
out from citing the Post and wrote an article, and the
Yeah.
reporter
Took our
wrote it up.
pictures.
Mm.
uh,
But
But
as you say,
it wasn't safe in a sense to stay.
uh,
we had our phone line cut. We stayed a year. That was a very
we didn't know whether it really was or not.
ulcer-producing year.
Uh, I probably was foolish enough. I made it a point to go in town every day
Mhm.
after that, and to go in the cafe and have coffee, and to go in to get my hair cut, and to go into the
Tell
drugstore.
Mike about the old patient that came
And,
in.
I had.
Did it affect the size of your practice?
It
Nobody
to what
came
extent?
It fell off.
Cut it, yeah.
Yeah, because well, a lot of blacks were warned by their plantation managers to stay away. And I had one man came down, and he came in, and he had his gun. I said, "What you carrying your gun for?" He said, "Well, I was told that I wouldn't be allowed to come through to see you." And I said, if anybody was going to stop me, that I was going to shoot him. I was going to come on in.
Interesting too. Our insurance got canceled. Who was
Oh,
it
yeah.
with?
Yeah, that's one of the
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
dangerous
Oh,
yeah.
things in the
Right away.
village, yeah.
With the clinic, and we never
Yeah.
got it back. And Reverend Sam Franklin went clear to the top
Yeah.
guy in
No,
Hartford
that
or
is-
wherever, and
yeah.
you couldn't. You know,
Right.
these
No,
insurance
they-
people,
that's
boy, they
right.
aren't. Even nowadays, they aren't taking
Yeah.
any chances.
No.
But another interesting
never
thing
did get
was,
insurance.
I was at the clinic one day, and this was about 10 days later,
Mhm.
and a man came riding up on his horse, just racing up, and came in. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Thought you'd be gone." And he said, I said, "No, I'm not planning to leave." He said, "Well, you may have to, and said, I've owed you $11 for about 3 years, and here it is. He said, I heard, said, I was plowing in the field, and I heard, and said, I just unhitched the horse, and I just jumped on and rode right down here and said, here's $11, because you may need it. And I had I don't know what I told you, I had a white patient in town that I had seen a number of times. She was a little bit of a hypochondriac, but she was an independently wealthy widow. And she called me up a week later and said, can you come see me? I said, sure. And I went in to see her and said, what's the matter? I said, ain't anything the matter. I said, I just want all these nosy neighbors of mine to see see your car parked out here in my driveway. And I said, I'm going to call you every week for the next month.
Who was that?
Mrs. Sweet,
Oh, really?
whose husband owned the sawmill and got killed.
Those are the kind of rewarding things in the
there
period
was
of troubles.
so many things. As I say, Harding called us up and says, come over and spend the weekend.
Mhm.
And we just took off and left.
Yeah.
And
What sort of person is he?
he was,
Harding's dead now, isn't he?
yeah,
He's a great
Mhm.
person, really.
he was well, it seemed like heaven, really, because we really did feel so.
It was at a low point right after that
Had a
meeting.
beautiful house, and went
Betty
into
cooked a big something on a spit.
a big family room with this big
Mhm.
roast cooking
Yeah.
in front of the fire, and we had a delicious
Mhm.
meal.
Son
and,
has the paper now. Harding
delightful,
Brothers.
comfortable night's sleep without any worries at all, and then we went
Yeah.
back the next day.
But that came at a period right after the
Yeah.
meeting when things looked
And he-
unsafe, actually.
And he wrote a scathing editorial,
Mhm.
and so on, and printed it.
Well, he had Greenville a different atmosphere, really,
Yeah.
than the rest of Mississippi.
He was able to
Great
do
editor,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, he was.
What other cheering things did you have like that from a distance?
Oh, we had
We had
from all over.
letters from people who we never had heard of before. They wrote us from all over the country. Scores of letters, some with a little contribution
Yeah.
in them. And
This was a
people-
period in which, in Mississippi, though, some very good people were being driven out. This fellow,
Yeah.
Silver from the
Oh, yeah.
university,
Mhm.
and others that you read about.
Yes.
Mhm.
Ministers who had been in churches for decades.
We had a Methodist minister in the town who was friendly.
35 blacks in Yazoo City, and you may have read the story of the guy who is from Yazoo City. He's since gone to New York and written a book. At any rate, 35
Mhm.
blacks got up nerve to go
Mhm.
and say, well, you know, we want to integrate the schools.
Mm-hmm.
And all 35 of them were just chopped off like that. Their businesses were wiped out and ruined. They left. And then this guy tells the story then, as he remembered it.
Mm-hmm.
And then years later, when he came back, when the high schools in Yazoo City, where he went to high school, were integrated, and what a difference it was. It wasn't easy, but it was done.
Right.
But there were a lot of, I had one white patient come up from below Chulo, about 15 miles south of Chulo, and they had said that, the fellow said, you know, I'd been wanting to come, but everybody said that I couldn't come. They were going to get me if I did.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but I wanted you to see my wife, and so I don't give a damn what they do. I brought her on anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I rambled.
Well, it
I
took a
know,
lot
it's
of-
been wonderful.
took a
How
lot
did you
of
feel the
courage.
other day when Governor Wallace had to
Wasn't it?
deliver the homecoming queens?
I
Well, things
thought
have
that
really
was
changed, you know.
well, Holmes County's changed because we entertained blacks from Holmes County here a year or so ago who was running for Board of Education. We got a representative, Henry Clark, Representative Clark from Holmes County, who represents 2 counties, defeated Wilburn Hooker, or Love, who used to be my patient, but I lost all my white counter patients after that.
What happened later with the student movement? Were Bolivar and Holmes part of the concentration counties or not, where the violence and
no.
the kids got killed? That was not the area.
No, not really.
It was
Down
further
in
south.
Humphrey County, Issaquena, Philadelphia were where the 3 from the north
Yeah,
got killed.
right.
SNCC came in, Corps, they did a lot in Greenwood.
Mhm.
There was some confrontation violence in Greenwood and in Jackson.
Mhm.
And in all parts, and the sit-in, the sit-ins, or the,
Mm.
what were they called?
Yeah.
Going into
They
the
began with
stores.
sit-ins
Yeah.
in Greensboro.
And voter registration and so on and so forth.
When we went back about the first or second time, there was a new feeling. I remember talking to some of the school teachers, sort of young, middle-aged
Yeah.
school teachers on the farm out there that day, and they weren't afraid anymore.
You left in '56, and when was this, Sue, that you went back?
We had sort of a reunion out on the place,
Oh, we
and
went-
some of the black school teacher friends were there.
Oh, well,
with Fanny.
well, this was actually about 65 that we were back in.
Almost 10 years
And,
later.
you know,
Yeah.
some of the young mothers and teachers said, you know,
Now,
just
the-
aren't afraid anymore.
Yeah. Now, what, by then, did you have, the co-op as such is gone. It's just a
It-
bookkeeping operation that Gene Cox keeps up.
And he has done all sorts of things like loan money to black students to go to school,
Yeah.
loan somebody some money to get started here. You've done all sorts
There's
of,
a head start.
Yeah, now,
Uh,
let me just place it
programs.
outside of Delta,
Yeah.
the Bolivar and Holmes County operation, which is ended up as Delta Foundation, did you
right.
say? Did the Southern Tenant Farmers Union or its related kind of liberal things do anything else in Mississippi, or was this it?
Not really. H.L. Mitchell moved to Louisiana. He lived in New Orleans for a while.
Did he do things like
And-
this down there?
And
Any
Gene
co-ops?
Cox kept up his membership and activities in the Southern Tenant
Mhm.
Farmers Union. Used to go to meetings in New
Mhm.
Orleans
Yeah.
and in Memphis. Um,
What has been happening?
Right.
H.L. Mitchell has been out to see you. He has some kind of microfilm.
and he's got a history of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union.
Published history of it.
Right.
Mitch is with what, some people working in the fishing industry?
Well, he tried to organize some of the canning and fishing.
Down
and some
in
of the-
Louisiana? or-
in Louisiana, and
Yeah.
then some of the lumber
Right.
people down
Yeah,
in
but
southern
they're almost,
Mississippi.
I get an idea they're historical anachronisms in a way.
Yeah.
It's not whatever thrust there was in Arkansas where it was.
No,
it's,
the real organization of farm labor never got anywhere.
Where is he now? He moved there.
Mitchell is living in Alabama.
Now, I looked for Clay East,
Did you?
but he has no listing in Averill or
Averill Valley?
or
We
no
haven't-
listing. But do you have an address or another person?
I
that
haven't
you reached with?
seen or heard from him since Mitch was here 2 years ago.
Lives in-
Mitch came to see you 2
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
Mitch tape recorded Clay's ramblings, you know.
I didn't know that.
He and Clay, yeah.
What was Clay East's role, and where was he?
Clay was
How did
just
you-
an ordinary white fellow growing up in a small Arkansas town who sort of got
In with the STFU?
in with the STFU and got his conscience bothered him and wanted to try to do something about it. And he can remember going down and having meetings in Arkansas and in Louisiana and
Mhm.
being hidden in places and being almost...
But he became an organizer for
Yeah.
many years then.
Yeah.
He's out of it now, he's retired, he and his wife
Do you know if
travel,
he's
but
got
Mitch is
I mean,
still-
could he be under another listing or just or not, have left or what?
Mhm. He could have left or died or anything, but I can...
It was
try
2
to-
years ago.
They had a
Yeah.
trailer and they traveled a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it
could
could
try
be.
to find out.
He wasn't a patient of yours where you'd have a phone number or anything.
Not for... We can call somebody in Marana and see
Someone in
if he's
Marana might know.
still around.
I just thought after you told me about him,
Yeah.
I'd see if he was around to
very
talk with.
friendly with it, yeah, he would love to talk to you.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But other than reminiscing like that, or someone coming to see you, there is no...
Nothing, no activities.
Were there any other doctors beside yourself at any of the operations?
No.
And were you ever called upon in any way to assist the union as a physician?
No.
Like at a big meeting or a convention or
No.
anything?
I was really
Strictly,
Strictly,
a community physician, really,
community
related to the
related
co-op
to the community.
farm, yeah,
Right.
but a community.
Saw
figure.
people over a 35-mile radius.
Yeah, I had thought somewhere when we first talked, there was some, I can't remember what you said that made me, why it sticks in my mind, like 15 cents a month of sharecrop. Was that somebody's
Oh.
dream? What was it I was thinking
We
of?
tried to start on
Yeah.
the farm.
Yeah, go ahead.
just the semblance of a cooperative project. In other words, instead of just giving everybody
Yeah.
completely free
Right.
care,
To prepay.
every family
Yeah.
is going to pay, I think it was 15 to 50 cents a month or something like
When
that.
did, in 38, you began those
38.
discussions?
Right.
And they never,
And
they continued for a year or
People
so?
still, for about a year or so, most people did pay in that amount.
So you didn't
For
have a
that-
means of deducting it, but they did pay that in rather than a fee, huh?
Right. And
That
they
was
got seen-
15 to 50 cents per person or per family, or
Per
how do you
family.
think? Per family.
Yeah, it was nothing.
It was off the top of your head, really, in costing terms.
And really, we continue to see them, all the people on the
Yeah.
farm, for free. They paid nothing for care.
But some of them did pay this in directly to you as the physician or to the co-op? Do you remember how?
I
it
think
worked?
it was just paid, I don't know,
Okay.
I don't remember.
But it was an effort
I
to
think
follow up.
all the money that was paid, I kept account of it,
Mm-hmm,
and I paid all the clinic expenses out of it.
mm-hmm.
And at the end of the year, I...
You had
we had about
975, you said, for a year.
$975. We did pretty good.
They said 1,000.
It went a lot further
Well,
than
one-
I can tell you than it does.
About a week before we were married, I had 4 babies due that I had promised to deliver. And they all 4 delivered in 24 hours. And I would go to one and check them, and Miss Cox would follow behind.
They were going this
She
way
ended
down the
up, I
road.
delivered 3 and she delivered 1 of them.
Yeah. Now, these were $25 deliveries then, or?
Well, I don't think these are paid. We may have got $15 a piece for those.
Yeah. On down to zero, huh?
On down to 0, mostly 0.
Yeah. What kind of non-paying percentage were you carrying in Holmes County, would you say?
Oh,
Of the total
I don't
number of
know.
people you
I had a
saw?
reputation. Dr. Kazar called me Santa Claus because I charged people so little.
Yeah. What were the other doctors charging for GP visit? office visit?
Well, I think doctors in town would charge $2 for an office visit.
You started out with $1 and then ended up
Well,
changed to $2.
it was flexible, $1 or $2, or a family of 6 people would come
Yeah.
in and they'd maybe get charged $3
Yeah.
for all 6 of them, or, you know, it was...
Yeah.